Very clay. Lots of clay. There I am. What clay? Then you're clay. So it's not, the soil is so much better, that it looks better. So I'm hoping. If it all says.
We watch a lot of rabbits.
Well, I did a very small area. I did in front, like a flower garden in front of my house, because they had a knockoff rose. We had that go away because yes, I mean, it was
So that's not where you
from that, you can't cure it, so. But I'll pay your flowers in front of my house, and got rid of stuff that they had, remnants and stuff. And most of it, there's a whole bunch more, I had to choose from regular way.
Yeah, every time I see somebody buying a plant, trying to make it.
What, black trees? I mean, they just overtake things and they get out of control. And you had it sold to the sun. It's so nice, and I would say, no, I can't come over here. So I cut a lot of them out. I didn't either. I never used it. We have a lot of loss. I guess it's more. We have our grass. So it's yeah.
So we have this,
They just.
So my mom was,
It feeds the
I
said, we are not having any guests over there.
it doesn't look like that.
I said, just, they'll cut it. They're so good now. So he did hold on and cut it, but I don't want to. This one runs down. Water. Well, as long as it's green, it's got a lot of lawns, looks like every 5 numbers. It's all very pretty.
6 degrees.
Most of the stuff green is
That's,
well, it's always green.
brown, 14s and.
Yeah, because we had Bermuda. I hate Bermuda. It's wonders everywhere. And it turns green. So I'm hoping I can just.
Do you have lots of Bermuda already in your yard?
When I lived in Oklahoma, I don't think they were here.
You probably do. I hate to tell you that. The only way to get rid of it's to move. But you kill everything else around it because the only thing prescribed to truly kill it out is glyphosate. Roundup, and it kills everything green. Bermuda. Now, some people love it, some people hate it. Most people, it's a cuss word. So I like it personally, but well, that's a different story. Don't you? Yes, on the dot.
Well, welcome to Lunch and Learn. We're excited to have you here with us today for the Master Gardeners of Brown County Lunch and Learn program. These free classes are held at noon time on the second Saturday of each month, and we cover a wide variety of topics. Next month's topic is bodacious daylilies with speaker Catherine Kogar, she's actually here today. So bring your lunch and bring your friends and join us next month on the second Saturday for bodacious daylilies. That's hard to say. Lunch and Learn is just one of the programs the Master Gardeners of Roane County offers to serve the horticulture education needs of the community. As you can see up here on the screen, our trained volunteers conduct a wide range of programs and activities throughout the year. We encourage you to join us either by becoming a Master Gardener or by joining Friends of Master Gardeners of Roane County Volunteer Group. If you haven't done so already, please sign in. There's a sign-in sheet on the back. I'll bring it around in case you haven't signed in. But sign in and include your email address if you want to be notified of future Master Gardeners of Roane County programs and activities. Also, be sure to check the appropriate column if you're interested in more information on joining our group. If you're joining us by Zoom, please don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat found at the bottom of the screen. We'll have time during the presentation for speakers to answer your online questions. Is that okay? Probably middle and end.
Oh, I've got the chat open, so I'll keep a notice on it. I'll keep an eye on it. So just feel free to type in and we'll jump in and answer them as they come in.
Okay. The reason why I just asked Jessica is not only is she our speaker today, but she's usually the person that runs the chat during our seminars, and so she's going to be doing double duty today. By the way, this month, our topic is not quite as sexy as bodacious daylilies. I say that, I get tongue-tied.
I keep wanting to say
lilies, but we'll call it sexy soil. How's that?
Well, you can't get bodacious daylilies without it.
exactly. It's the most important topic.
Jessica is our agriculture extension agent here in Roane County. She's also the director of the offices here. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in agribusiness from Mississippi State University. Her master's degree is in agriculture from the University of Tennessee. When I asked her what else she wanted me to tell you about her is she likes to be outside, so what a perfect job for that. Let's see. Please join me in welcoming Jessica.
Thank you. As Connie said, my name is Jessica Wilkinson Smith. I'm originally from South Mississippi, so if I talk a little different, that's why. I'm slowly adapting to East Tennessee lingo, and I catch myself saying that, having the accent occasionally. So feel free as we walk through this to talk. I'm very informal. Talk with me. Let's have a chat. I'm not big on a lecture style. I'm more of a conversational style. So stop me. Let's talk. If you're on Zoom with us, feel free to type it into the chat. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, sorry, I can't keep all of the windows open at the same time, so we'll go back and answer those afterwards. But just feel free to hop in, ask questions, and we'll get started. So if you'll notice there's subtitles popping up on the bottom, that's for the benefit of those online. So sorry, it may get a little distracting at the bottom. Hopefully they're close to being accurate. So a little bit about our office here and what we do first. Our office is composed of a ag agent to help with agricultural and natural resources. That's myself. Family consumer science agent, that's traditionally the home ec agent. Does anything from nutrition programs to traditional help within the family type programs. Anna Johnson focuses on 4-H youth development. And then Linda Cox is our administrative assistant until she informed me for about 10 more days. She retires at the end of the month. So we will have a vacancy there. And then Sonia Eskridge is our newest team member. She focuses on working with SNAP eligible families on nutrition education. So I have a little something for everybody. So the University of Tennessee's mission is we are considered a gateway to the university to bring the research to the people. I like to think of ourselves as the front porch of the university. We bring the information to you in a relatable way that we can sit and have a conversation about it and talk about it, those best practices in ag and natural resources, family consumer science, and 4-H youth development, and community economic development. So a few of the programs that we do here at the office, within ag and natural resources. Ag, we like to call everything the master of something. So we have the master pre-producer, master gardener, farm management planning, beef quality assurance, master small ruminant, master backyard poultry is brand new that actually started here in Roane County. That's now a statewide program. And then grazing management, weed management programs. We'll work with a lot with residential horticulture, which is the outreach that brings it here as well. So we talk a lot about vegetable gardening, turf management, what weed is growing in my yard. I have, it's about once a week I come in and I have a clump of dirt sitting on my, or a clump of soil sitting on my desk with a bunch of grass and weeds attached to it, and we'll know what it is. Excuse me, my allergies are very annoyed today. And then our master gardeners, which is what brings you here today. This is their program that they run on the second Saturday of every month. They have lots of other programs they do throughout the county. But to become a master gardener, it's a 40-hour certification class, and there's yearly requirements to keep up your certification. So, and their mission is to provide information to the public on residential horticulture education. So if you're interested in more about what they do, they have 4 ladies here that can help answer a lot of those questions. I can as well. So now what you're here for. So what we're going to talk about today is the basics of soil health, what that means, what that looks like, how we get healthier soil, and then how we can recognize if our soil is healthy or not. So why do we care about this? It affects everything, regardless if you're just wanting pretty flowers in your yard, if you're wanting grass and turf in your yard, if you're wanting to grow a small garden, or if you're wanting a 50-acre production farm. Doesn't matter. You have to have soil in good shape to run any of it. Why we need to care about this on a global spectrum. By 2050, it's estimated that our world population is going to be at 9.1 billion people. Problem with that is we're going to have to feed more people on less land because those people need places to live. So we have to look at our supply chain level of how can we be locally sourced as well as feed everyone else globally. So that's why we need to care about this a little bit, to where we can know how to take care of ourselves at home. Food production needs are going to be expected to increase by about 70% out of that. And just to give a perspective, from 1982 to 2007, 14 million acres of farmland was lost to development in the U.S. So we're feeding more and more people in less and less space. And our energy demand is going up. Increased use of biofuels, corn. Corn is the biggest production of any of our biofuels. And increased use of fertilizer to be able to maintain these soils' health. So the goal of what we're going to talk about a little bit today is how we can get our soil to maintenance levels so we're using less fertilizer, though we're never going to get fully away from it. Just to look at a little bit about what soil contains, 1 teaspoon of healthy soil has anywhere from 100 million to 1 billion individual bacteria that do good things in our soil to help break down organic matter in our soil, help combat issues. It's made up of about 45% minerals, 25% water, 5% organic matter, and 25% air. Now, as we get into those spectrums, there's things that change and alter this. So our goal is to get to these measurements. So healthy soil, like I said, is key to being able to feed those 9 billion people by 2050. Earthworm population is very important in our soil, and a healthy soil, earthworm population can consume about 2 tons of dry matter per acre per year to help break down and keep our soils healthy. So what is soil? We're going to refer to everything as soil. Dirt is what gets under your fingernails. We don't have dirt, we have soil. And we're going to work on conditioning our soil. It's mineral and organic components as a result of physical and chemical processes that has changed and built over thousands of years. To get 1 inch of top layer, it takes about 2,000 years to fully break that down and get to that point. So it's a long process. There are things we can do to help speed that up. So what is soil health? It's the continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem, because our soil is an ecosystem in itself. And my ecosystem at my house is going to be very different than what Catherine has at her house. It's very targeted for each individual person. And we want to keep that living and working for us to be able to sustain plants, animals, and humans. So it's a very living organism that's composed of very different things: the food, water, shelter, habitat, power, and sunlight for all of those living organisms that are in our soil. Now, there's lots of things we do that can degrade it and affect it. We can over-till it, we can fertilize too much, we can fertilize not enough. Pesticides, we can overuse them, we can underutilize them. Plant diversity, we use the same thing continued over and over. We have a very monocultured area. And then mowing. If you're working with turf, this is a bigger issue. If you're starting a new garden in another area, it's a bigger issue. It's the same principle if we're looking at forage production for a farm as overgrazing does. Gets it way too small, causes issue in root development. We'll talk a little more of that specifically. So with the new construction, we see a lot of areas that look like this. There's no different in what's wrong with these soils than from that new construction area to this heavily tilled farm. They both need the same things. They both have the same issues, and they're both lacking in what they need of being able to hold the air and moisture temperatures they need, and they're staying way too hot and causing other issues. So how do we get from there to these healthier soils? So that's what we're going to focus a lot on. So why do we care about this? If we don't take care of our soil, they're staying dried and compacted. They're gonna stay dried and cracked all year. That tells us it's not getting enough water put through there. Digging holes is going to be difficult for us to plant with. If you're using rhododendrons, hydrangeas, or other shrubs in hot weather, they'll wither greatly even when you're adding water because they can't hold water at their roots. Tomatoes and peppers get blossom end rot even when fertilized with calcium because they don't get the moisture content they need. So it covers a large range of issues. So those disturbances that impact our soil health. Physical tillage, it causes a lot of compaction. We think it's a little funny. You do have to start off tilling it at some point. Even if you're going to a no-till practice of a garden, you have to start off with some till to get it there. But over-tilling it can cause immense compaction. What that does is even though we break all those particles apart when we till, as they dry, they crisp back together and end up causing that very tight, no pore space. The water just runs across the top and you'll have very pooling in certain areas. Lack of plant diversity, biological issues. Plant diversity, plants have different root stages and root levels. So those different root levels going through allow that pore space to increase. And then chemical use, misuse of fertilizer, not using it appropriately, using too much. Too much of a good thing is not a good thing. We need to use only what we need. We'll talk about how we find out what we need. And that even goes with pesticides, even manures. Natural compost and natural fertilizers, too much of it can still be not a good thing for our soil. And no diversity in our crop production. Growing a single species and a few crops on our rotation, if we're doing a vegetable garden, for example, growing tomatoes continually in the same area or potatoes continually in the same area, you're going to do nothing but breed their problems while you're trying to breed those tomatoes or breed those potatoes or whatever it is. We need to rotate. So we're not allowing those plants to continue to pull too much while the nutrients they need out of it, also removing the nutrients they need, but also allowing all of their pests and other issues to breed and continually live right there. We want to move it around to be able to move and remove some of those out of the soil. It also limits the plant root issues and also hampers the development of a diverse biota, which, like we talked about, you're allowing all of the bad things to continue to grow in those areas too, which will eventually outnumber those good things we want. Over mowing. This is, like I said, it applies to everything. So there's a few things that are really targeted to vegetable gardening I'm going to talk about. Some are really targeted to ornamentals. Some are really targeted to our turf, but it's all relevant. Especially the turf management before you start a garden in an area is just as important with how you maintain it moving forward after a garden's there. Because if you're continuing to mow, say at 1 inch height, 1.5 inch height, or even at 2 inch height, you are pulling it down consistently, and it's consistently having to focus on putting leaf back up. If you mow at 4 inches or 3.5 inches and not taking any more than 1/3 of the plant away at a time, it is consistently being able to focus. It puts up just a little growth. It'll actually start to grow slower over time, so you're mowing less. And then you will push, it's allowing roots to push down and create larger pore space moving forward. And it also allows that pore space to increase. It allows that soil fungi to reproduce and grow as it needs to, because the temperatures are staying cooler. It's not getting too hot for it. It's helping maintain a more steady soil temperature over time. It's putting a nice thick carpet across the top of it. And it's decreasing those weeds, because as those weed seeds need to germinate, what do they need? What does a seed need to germinate? Water. What else? Contact with the soil, and one other important thing, the sunlight. If that grass is covering that soil, it can't get the contact it needs. It can't get the sunlight it needs to be able to make it happen. And it reduces that germination. Also, those roots are working under the ground and not creating a space for those weeds to be able to push through and put their roots down. So over mowing can cause a big problem over time. Yes.
I always mow mine 3 to 4 inches
Mhm.
early in the season.
Mhm.
I start with 3,
Mhm.
but as it gets warmer.
Yep.
I don't understand why anybody would want to mow their lawn short.
Some-
It keeps you from having to mow.
Yeah.
See-
And then you end up killing it and you don't have to mow at all.
Yes, that's also part of it. Yes, the mentality is we get it to the point it's not growing, so we don't have to cut it. Well, the thing is, it's just the direct opposite. It's the same principle with mowing it at a higher level. You do it so long, it gets used to it. You don't have to mow as much either. It just takes longer to get to that point than it does if we just skin it.
But I think that's the logic behind it.
Yes.
Because I thought that myself. What if I mow this shorter, then I don't have to mow as much.
Yes.
I got a question.
Okay.
for you. I have a raised bed,
Mhm.
and in the fall, I just put white
Mhm.
pine straw
Mhm.
over the top.
Yep.
And I do that because I'm not sure I know what to do when someone says, put a cover crop on
Mhm.
there. I don't know what to do with that cover crop in the spring. Do you take the whole thing off? Do you turn it over and let it die? Do you mix it in? Do you go right on top of that?
Most of the time, what you do with it, you have several different ways you can do it, and also depends on what you plant. Most of my answers will start with "it depends." It's the economist coming out at me. I'm sorry, but the reason with say if you did predominantly types of rye, and even threw in some turnips in there with it, what you do is come in and we would do some type of rolling over it. You can take a wood post and roll it, crimp it down. You can get a really fancy roller if you want to spend the money to roll it. Anything to roll it down, and you're essentially breaking it. You're not wanting to mow or do anything with it, and you can let it break down into the soil naturally. You can turn it in a little bit if you want to with it, or you can do some layering with it. You can come in, break that down, put some fresh moist newspaper or cardboard on top of it, and then put some fresh compost and soil across the top of it and layer it up. You have several different options with it. That's generally what, if you're working with raised beds, works better, to be able to go in, break it down, and work that layer up. Because you're going to end up needing that. They settle over time. You have to add soil back anyway, so you're able to get more nutrients back to it. If you're wanting to start, say you're wanting to do a early spring summer garden, you're wanting to do this process about 4 to 6 weeks before you want to plant, to give it time to break down. Yes, it just depends on what you're wanting to plant and when you're wanting to do it. Good question. So how do we recognize our soil if it's healthy? The chemical indicators of it, if our nutrients are where it's supposed to be, our optimal pH. pH is very important for several reasons. If you'll look here at the optimal point is about 6.5. We will take up to 7.5, and we'll even go down to 6. 5.5 is getting questionable. But if you'll look right here, this is at the levels it will uptake nutrients. You can have the right amount of nitrogen there all day long, but if the pH is wrong, it's not usable by those plants at all. The pH is the most important starting point, is to get it to the right point. So with that, if you'll look at 6.5, it's getting the maximum amount of all those macro and micronutrients. We started to see some dwindling once we get past 7.5 and once we get past 5.5. We like to see at that 6.5 window though. Because the more acidic the soils are, it decreases the availability, unless you're working with something like hydrangeas or blueberries that love acidic soils. So, and if your chemistry's off too, those natural organisms in there, our earthworms, even those natural bacteria and fungi are not going to grow like they're supposed to. They're not happy. They're not going to be a base level. We need to try to get to that target point. Physical indicators. Available water capacity. Do we have a lot of pooling telling us that it's compacted? Do we water and all of a sudden it looks like we have never watered at all because it dries and crusts back over? Probably have a lot of sand and it went straight through. So, and soil compaction issues. And then aggregate stability. Those nutrients, how stable are they in the soil? What form are they there? So what makes a productive soil? So physical support of it, that water and airspace. We see that compacted soil is really tight, nothing can get through there. We want to be able to break apart and have that to where those nutrients are available, root space are available, the air and water is there. Those biological indicators. Those soil microbes, when you dig back, do you see earthworms and insects happily living there? Bacteria and fungi support there. Active carbon. What is that? What is there in active nutrients to be able to be used for those plants? Is it there? Organic matter. Do you have any there or is it straight clay? Respiration. Those plants have to breathe too. Is there a good soil respiration rate as well? The soil has to be able to release carbon dioxide and take in oxygen just like we do. And if that pore space isn't there, it's not doing that either. So the point of all of this, we've got to this point, is that making soil health as a priority is taking a journey. This is not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens in 2 days. It's something that's a process to be able to maximize the presence of living roots, to minimize disturbances, to maximize the soil coverage, and maximize biodiversity, to continually roll through this process to have a healthy soil. It's not considered a destination. It's very much a journey. You don't get there and stay there and it's going to be perfect all the way out. It's not. Most soils aren't in need of sustainability. They need to be regenerated, meaning they just need to be started, brought back up to a point, and then that's when we can sustain them. They need to be brought and regenerated to life, and then we can sustain them from there. And it's a journey. It doesn't end when you finally hit the point of my soil is great. You have to do things to keep it there. And that's where we're going to go from here. What are these steps we have to take to get it there and then keep it there? Number one, always my number one when it comes to working with the soil. Have you done a soil test? Most of the time that answer is no. That's going to be where we start because we can figure out exactly what nutrients are there. This is what one looks like. It tells us our pH, it doesn't give you an actual nitrogen count with how these things are produced, and our testing is done. They do test it and give you recommendations of how to get there. Because nitrogen, if when you're doing these, you're getting a snapshot of what it is at that current moment in time. Versus all of these are more sustainable. Nitrogen leaves the soil the fastest because that's what our plants use the most. So having that number that day, long-term isn't going to be beneficial for you, is why it's not included in this. And it gives you these nice recommendations of this is from a garden this year in Roane County to give you a perspective of what it does. It gives organic options, also gives you conventional fertilizer options, whichever one you want to work with. But do this and then act on it at the appropriate point in time. You got to start here. 2, adding our organic matter. Why? It improves our structure. It improves our tilth and workability of our soil. We can use Compost, we can use our cover crops. We can use yard waste and yard clippings, things like that in points and times. But it needs to be composted. If you're bagging your grass clippings and putting it over your vegetable garden, what else are you adding in there? Weed seeds all day long. It needs to be composted to kill those seeds out. But there's ways you can utilize it and work with it. Yes.
Back on the soil analysis, I've had my lawn tested twice in the last 3 years. Consistently shows that I need more phosphorus in the back where I don't in the front. I struggle trying to find higher phosphorus fertilizers that don't have more nitrogen and potash. Really hard to find.
Yes.
And I finally called the lab to find out if you put say just 13 down, do the extra nitrogen and the potash hurt you? Because trying to find a special fertilizer with just the higher phosphorus is extremely expensive.
Yes.
Difficult. He said no. It doesn't really hurt to have the extra nitrogen and potash.
Yeah.
So go to Walmart and get the 13.
Yeah. So with the main reasons that it ever is harmful is if you already have very high levels. Most of the time here in this side of the part of the state, we don't have that problem. We give you what's the ideal if you can work with it, but there's always workarounds with it. Generally with that, like I said, nitrogen is used really quickly in the soil. So having that extra, unless you just already have a really high number, is not going to hurt anything. Unless you're working in a vegetable garden standpoint where too much nitrogen can burn a bunch of tomatoes very quickly. So you want to make sure what your scenario has been in a lawn. Most of the time it's not. Yeah. I remember talking to you about that. Yeah. So again, increasing that organic matter, we're striving to improve our soil base, increase our soil coverage, that natural organisms growing in there, and then protect our soil and our ecosystem also by being able to have those organisms growing in there and working how we need it to. So where does it build up? Most of the time, if we're working in a garden or a traditional lawn standpoint, it builds up in that first 2.5 inches. It's right there where that most nutrient is. Now, if you go, say, and look at and take a plug out of a golf course, because they do a lot of cross cutting and different things to be able to work that soil at a small level, it is very deep. It goes down about 6 inches. We generally don't work with that because they're working with, say, dwarf Bermuda that gets mowed at an 1/8 of an inch. It handles a lot of pressure. It needs very deep roots. So they're working trying to push it down. We don't need that. We need that top 2.5 inches to be extremely healthy. Because most of the time when we're planting something, we're going down about 6. We're going to disturb it some work there, but we need that strong principle at the top. So how do we measure our organic matter to know what our soil, our baseline is, where we're at? Look at it. When you pull it back, do you look in there and see any type of earthworms? When you take out a scoop of soil, is it really, when you pick it up and squeeze it in your hand, does it stick together or crumble apart? Does it ribbon out? Look at it. See where baseline you're starting is. Is it puddling or standing water? After a good rain, go out and look. See how long it takes it to soak into your soil. There's also different types of home perk tests you can do to see what the filtration of your soil is. Measure it with your fingers. Take a plug out, look and see where you see that clear definition of organic matter. Most soil tests I help do with a baselines here, it's less than 1/2 inch because it's extremely compacted and hasn't been worked with. Smell the soil. Good, healthy soil has a really earthy smell. If it is not having if it has too much iron in it, for example, you will smell it. If it has, especially with our clay-based soil, we'll smell it a lot working in there. If we're having too much nutrients. It starts with just looking at it and comparing it to what our goal is. Looking at the overall structure of it. Does your ground look like this in the summer in places? It's probably heavily compacted. It crusts, it's very dense and has loss of aggregate stability. With it being that dry, those nutrients are not very stable at all. They're just bouncing around looking for places to go. We want to improve our airflow and our water flow. Just more disturbance equals more compaction. Walking over the area is going to increase more compaction over time. We want to have designated walking paths to keep from encouraging that compaction to happen. If that's around our ornamental gardens, if it's around where we're going to put a vegetable garden next year, we know that we want to start avoiding walking over that area simply as much. More disturbing our soil equals more weeds. We talked about that a while ago. And encourage that root growth. Do things to go ahead and start encouraging those roots to push down and remove that weed pressure from those. Like I talked about, use designated walking paths. If you have raised beds, you'll be able to just use right around the area, right around the edges of it. You really want to reduce weeds and build up the area around it. Put cardboard down, mulch it in, layer it each year. You're going to encourage the health of that soil, but you're also going to keep weeds and everything else away from it and away from your garden. Dual purpose. Use hand tools. I know when we're working in our garden, sometimes we're getting ready to plant these big bushes. A lot of people have tendencies to want to go pull out a good auger because it gets a deep hole a lot faster than our arms do, right? It heats up and melts that clay, everything together. It creates a very nice tight pot. Those roots are not going to want to push through it, and we're going to cause issues with it. Working within our gardens also, our best thing we want to go through there is run the big tiller straight through it. We don't have to do that if our soils have been worked with and conditioned. We can go in, work the areas that need to be done, put cardboard down, layer up mulch around our plants that we're planting, and we've reduced having to disturb the soil as much. Yes?
Can you say more about this cardboard thing?
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it.
So what cardboard does, or even newspaper, it serves as a barrier. It's basically, if you want to look at it, is biodegradable landscaping cloth. Principle of landscaping cloth is you put it out, it's going to serve as a weed barrier. What's below, it's not going to come up. That's what that cardboard is doing. It's going there, but it's also helping hold moisture there. If you're planting above it, it's helping keep moisture up above for those plants to grow. And then you're going to put mulch on top of it. It's going to break down, and what it's done is pushed those weed seeds further down. You're going to come back and layer it up next year. It just provides a good layer barrier. It's a biodegradable mulch is how we look at it, versus saying those landscaping fabrics or black plastics are non-biodegradable mulch. We want to stay away from. Yes?
Does ink in the newspaper, does that have any effect?
Generally, no.
Yeah, newspapers are biodegradable.
Yes.
But around here, cardboard works better because our weeds are so
Aggressive. Yes. Cardboard is your friend. And
What sort of mulch would you put on top of the cardboard?
you depends on what you want to work with. You can use hardwood mulches. You can use dyed mulches. I like to stay away from those personally, and from the research of it, just because they break down a lot faster than the dyes do. There's nothing wrong with the dyes. It just breaks down a little faster for my purpose of it. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It'll go, yeah. Yes. And, when we're talking about mulches too, in some instances, that's rock because you're wanting to build and work around it and do other things. But that's the mulch you're using. Obviously, it's not breaking down. No. You can use pine needles. Unless it's been composted, don't use your grass clippings. You can use pine needles and things like that, especially around acidic living things, because it adds acid back to the soil. Some people love to do this for the other purposes from it, using straw as a mulch can also work, but you're bringing in weed presence back with it. Some people have other features. They want some of that straw to be able to establish roots and cover crops. There's some thoughts behind it. But it really just varies on what your end goal is as to what you would want to use. Yes?
I'm making compost. I'm in my second year. I have a cat
Mhm.
and I have a kitty litter box.
Mhm.
I use a sort of sand-based
Mhm.
kitty litter. Is that okay to put in the compost?
No, we do not. We do not do any type of household pet manure, so dog or cat. Some people even want to try to use bird or guinea pigs, things in their house. No, just because a lot of those critters carry zoonotic diseases that composting's not going to kill within their feces.
So is my compost now infected because I've been using
It potentially could be if your cat had something. I would stop using it. Stop it. No, so we do use livestock, so cow and horse. We try to stay away from pigs mostly because it's too loose to work with. Chicken, yes. Chicken litter is a fantastic one. It's a great nitrogen fixator. It stinks, yes. But after it's composted, it doesn't. The problem with smells in the fields generally is they're spreading very fresh litter and allowing it to compost in place. Mhm. Yes, it is.
Are there sources around here for composted cow and horse manure?
There are some local farms that do sell theirs. There's a few. Generally, you purchase it commercially, though. The one that we did have access to, as far as they did mushroom composting, they no longer sell to the public. They only do private businesses and contractors. Oh, yeah. Make good friends with a local farmer. They'll gladly let you come haul off their manure.
Decades ago, I did a garden.
Mhm.
Folks outside. Teenager. I brought in half topsoil, it's decent topsoil.
Mhm.
And my sister worked at a place with horses.
Mhm.
She had a huge compost pile.
Yes.
I did 50-50
Mhm.
until, ooh, was that a hot garden?
Yes.
Tomatoes would be 6 feet tall.
Oh, yeah. They were real happy.
But you have to wait on the horse.
It needs to be composted through to go through that heat cycle because horse and cattle both, the whole seeds go through their gut tract. They don't break down at all. Two, you also have to be careful of knowing where those animals were grazed because sometimes they've been treated with an herbicide that the grass has. They've eaten that, so therefore those seeds have came through treated with that herbicide. And some of those composting still won't get it to a breakdown point. Most of the time it does. To where, so you turn around and spread that out and say it's been done with a long-term glyphosate, you've just spread out something that's just going to never allow what your plants to germinate are. So know your source if you're going to get local compost. If you're buying commercially, we know all of those have been screened and tested, but just know your source and what they've sprayed.
This was free.
Yeah. That was the perk of it. Yeah, make good friends with, if you have know someone that has horses or cows, make good friends with them. They'll generally let you come take out what they've mucked out of stalls. And horse people specifically are very particular about what their horses eat, so you usually have to worry about that coming from horses. Yes.
Can you use like that pine shavings that you use in horse bed? I mean, put it down for bedding in horses.
Mhm.
Is that on your garden?
You
I
can.
mean, not after it's been used, like fresh.
You can. It generally has. You can use it. It just breaks down really quickly because it's so thin. But you can use it. Generally, like if you're starting a new raised bed, I like to use it at the base layer. Like if we put that fresh cardboard down, put a layer of those fresh shavings down and wet it down. It helps hold the moisture in there better, and then start layering up with soil. I don't like to use it above ground because it breaks down so quickly, and you're going to keep throwing money at it. Versus, yes, the bagged mulch or even mulch by the scoop is a little more expensive, but it lasts longer usually than using those shavings. Yeah.
They haven't touched their gardens in so long.
Yeah.
Now, that I figured if I put that on, maybe it would at least keep the water.
Yes, it'll keep moisture there.
drying out.
Yeah, it keeps the moisture there really well. They just tend to break down faster, especially as the heat gets hot, especially as the temperatures get hotter. It breaks down faster.
What's been your experience with what I call dump mulch?
Waste center. I don't know a whole lot about it. I know a lot of people use it. I do know it usually breaks down quicker than what you get other places, just because it's whatever it is. And it's very much just straight shavings at the end of the day. Some of it has been compared to sawdust by some people. I know that's used. It just depends on, I guess, who's mulched it that day as to how fine they mulched it and what's in it and the contents of it. But what I know about it, it tends to break down a little faster than if you go commercial with it. But it's also a good cheap source too. Mm-hmm. If you're having trees cut, have them mulch them down in place and leave it on there. It's cheaper for you than them hauling them out. And you can also compost it out or treat it and then use it on your own property too. It works great. So with those composts, whatever you're choosing to use, whether it's in our flowers or vegetable gardens, we're wanting to put in about 1 to 2 inches thick of it on top and try to work it down into about 6 to 8 inches deep of how we're digging and putting it into the soil. Trees and shrubs, if we're getting ready to plant in those, because those roots go deeper, we want that compost to get about 12 inches deep as we're working with it. Now we want to avoid, say when we're planting these trees and shrubs, of adding it directly to the hole that we're planting them in, because the goal is to get those roots to go out and be nice, spread deep and heavy. If you're putting all of that nutrients right there in that hole, you just created a wonderful pot it's never going to want to leave. So we want to treat the entire area all the way out around it to where it has to search out and find those nutrients. Again, looking at how this affects our runoff and our soil compaction, and allows that water infiltration. If it's too compacted on top, it just runs right off. That's why the bottom of the hill usually has the best grass. If you notice, that base of the hill has the best grass because it's getting the most moisture content there. And the top of the hill and the slopes are more compacted. So we want to work and prevent that where that water can infiltrate down. It also reduces erosion over time. Yes, ma'am.
I thought those spike things that go into the grass, is that good for it or bad? Where, you know, they have those rollers that have the big spikes.
The rollers with the big spikes, those are generally aerators. So it's pulling out small plugs. Yes, that's very good for it. It's allowing that air space to get down in there. It's a quick way to move out some compaction and get it moving in the right spot. If you're working with turf, we usually recommend aerating at least once a year to pull out a lot of our, if you really want to go for turf and you really want a lawn and not a yard, we'll even look at not just aeration, but dethatching to pull out all of those, that base layer of grass clippings that are in there. Yes, good half-inch thatch. Now, if you're getting started and the person has been a person or before you or how it's been maintained, there's some instances that those can be 2 and 3 inches deep. So we'll need to pull those out because it starts compacting and it holds too much moisture at the base of those, the base of the grass, and it causes mold and decay of those the grass roots. We want to avoid that.
But if you want to improve the lawn soil,
Mm-hmm.
you can't really tell.
No. So we do what's called overdressing with it. If we come in and we put in just a thin layer of that compost down in there, work it in, just broadcast it about once, twice a year. Same principle as when we're doing our, we broadcast our fertilizer. It's doing a very thin layer of compost over time, a couple times a year. You're not going to go for that 1 to 2 inch, obviously. You're going to go more to about a ½ inch twice a year and broadcast it and kind of get it down to the soil line level. Does that make sense? You do it very carefully. You can broadcast it just like you do, say, seeds or your fertilizer, or you can use your hand and gently rake it in to the soil line, not pull back, just gently push it down to the soil level. It's a very slow process. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mowing the leaves
Mm-hmm.
on the trees that
Yeah.
fall, is that
Mm-hmm.
the same thing? as
Yes.
Doing that
Mm-hmm.
with mulch?
Yes, that is with it. For example, with say oak leaves, puts a lot of acidity back to the soil with nutrients to it. Could also be of putting it down and then running your mower over it with a mulching blade. It pushes things back down to the soil level too. There's different ways to do it to not be aggressive with it. You can broadcast it and run that mulching blade down. The force pushes things back down to the soil. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I have about 1.5 acres of mulch.
It's not easy.
I can't really be spreading that huge mulch
No.
Cut it real short and start over.
No, but that's the thing too, of what you're working with and you're working with doing your fertilizer schedule, you're going to be doing this anyway. It's just at a slower rate than if you were starting completely from scratch and had the ability to go in and put that fresh layer in and then put grass seed over it. With your approach, when what you're doing, following that soil test and working in, dethatching, allowing those clippings to break down on their own, allowing that organic matter, it's building on its own. It's just taking more time. You're still doing it. And there's ways to help it along if you wanted to go through the if you wanted to put in the extra back work to it. But you're still getting the same results. It's just going to take you a little longer. So with our fresh versus composted sources, fresh, it rapidly decomposes, but the problem with that, it is using that nitrogen to fixate and break down. It's taking away nitrogen from the soil before it puts it into the soil. So personally, and the research wise, I always recommend going with the decomposed to start with instead of letting it compost in place, because it's going to have the sources ready to use, ready to break down, especially if we're working in a vegetable garden scenario or if we're working on establishing a new ornamental bed. Those sources are there and ready. Keep the soil covered. Regardless of what we're working with, if our goal is with turf or grass, we're wanting to keep a good steady cover of grass all the time. If we're working in an ornamental bed, we don't want dirt spots in the middle, soil spots in the middle. We want that mulch covering that to be able to, what it does protect the soil, holds temperature down, holds the moisture in and makes it available to the plants. It also prevents erosion. In our vegetable gardens, we want to cover the soil. Again, for the same reasons we do in our ornamental gardens. It is fighting back weed pressure, it's keeping the temperature down. It's also holding in moisture that's there for the those plants ready to use. And the biggest thing in a vegetable garden, it's minimizing your weeds and the ornamentals. It's minimizing your weed control. Makes a lot less work for you long term. I'm all for working smarter, not harder. Take the extra time, put the mulch down. Yes, ma'am.
So when you put the mulch down, like you've got this inch, you don't.
Nope.
lay in that,
No.
right?
No. You lay it across, just cover it's like a blanket for you at night when you lay down to bed. You just want to lay across the top of you. You want to lay across the soil continuously. Once you plant, you come in, and we'll look at it. You don't do this. Even with our tomato plants, we don't come up with a big mound touching it. It holds moisture, it creates insects, a great place for insects, fungus, all those things to brood. We want to do a far out layer around its soil, around its root zone, about an inch and a half thick, 2 inches in some cases, depends on what we're doing, to be able to hold that moisture in.
What do you do if you plant something like lettuce? You can't go around and put mulch on like each little plant.
As they come up, you don't want to, obviously you're going to leave out where it comes, as it comes up, you're going to start building it in a little on the sides to keep the weed pressure down. Mm-hmm.
And this is also where you would use the cardboard and then you put the mulch on it?
You can, yes. Yeah.
Starting out.
Yes. Yes. Cardboard is your best friend. And there's lots of resources around here. Most box stores you go to say, hey, can I get some cardboard out of your cardboard bin? As long as they haven't run the compactor, they say, yep, let's go to the back and you can load up a buggy and take it out of there. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. If you get a lot of Amazon boxes are perfect for that.
I just came from the recycling center and the bin is full.
Yes. Go to the recycling center and borrow. If you look at a lot of businesses in town, landscapers love to do this, and it makes me cringe every time I see them out doing it. But it creates problems long term. It does kill the trees. It creates a lot of fungus issues. It creates a lot of root damage over time. It's holding moisture right there at the trunk. It's killing the roots all the way in a circle around the tree, and it's essentially choking it. It looks pretty.
It does?
Yeah. Yes.
If you ever go to Sam's, they sell those rings
Mm-hmm.
of mulch made out of old tires.
Mm-hmm.
Does that create fungus or?
It can. It can if it pushes too close to them. It also is if you're putting them around a tree, that tree eventually's trunk is going to meet that. And it can grow around it, but it's going to eventually choke and collar it off too if you get to a point that it's too big. Those work better to me if you're going to do, say, a controlled planting in them, that you're trying to just create some pop of color somewhere, and to be able to put a type of ornamental shrub in there, for example, that's not going to expand out or have that collaring issue over time. They sell a lot of things in landscaping because people think it looks good, with not thinking about the long-term implications of using them. Always do your research. And if you're looking up of how effective this is, I'll tell you a quick tool. If you're wanting to search any type of information related to your garden, if you're wanting to do, say, soil health, if you type in soil health in Google, you're going to find 50,000 posts on message boards that are everybody's opinion. You want to look for research-based information. So you would type in soil health, the word site, SITE, .edu, and it only pulls up educational websites. Connie's writing it out up there. But whatever it is, soil health, whatever your topic is, if you'll follow it up with site:.edu, no spaces. Yep, you did good. Type it in there. Whether that's, if you're looking for even plant identification websites, things like that, site.edu. Another one is to do site.gov, because you'll get NRCS and USDA information. The NRCS is the Natural Resource Conservation Services, and also the Soil and Water Conservation Services. They're within the same wheelhouse. And then the United States Department of Agriculture and their research that's been published as well. Yes. Okay. Yes. You pull that burlap away from it to allow it to expand those out. Eventually, over time, the burlap will break down, but you run the risk at the point in time of it's going to collar off that tree and become root bound. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. You pull it out and you try to fan out the roots and get them to lay down into the hole to be able to spread out. You can leave it in the hole, but you want to open it up. Yes. And one thing of it is, family just moved into a house in the county. They were having some issues with these huge maple trees. And we went out and looked, and we got to pull them back. There were layers and layers. They put black plastic down and covered in mulch. Black plastic, covered it in mulch over the years. We dug back about 10 layers of black plastic that was pushing in. It was collaring off these trees. These trees were about 30 to 40-year-old trees. They were very sizable. But it was collaring off and causing damage. We were starting to see root damage come up. Well, at that point in time, once you start seeing root damage in a tree, in the leaves and in the limbs, it's been going on for 5 years or more. It takes 5 years for something going on in the roots to show up in the tree usually. So a lot of damage has already been done. We pulled a lot of it out. They've dug it back, and it went out the entire root zone. The previous owners of this house put down a huge circle of plastic and covered it in mulch year after year. So that's the reason we go to saying using cardboard, because it's going to break down with it. That black plastic, it usually takes, some of them now will break down in 60 years. Back then, those probably won't break down in 100 years. So we want to avoid using those types of mulches. And that's the reason we want to pull that burlap away, for the same reason of it's going to break down, but it's going to cause that same collaring problem. So just think about what we're using. We wouldn't want black plastic wrapped around us. We wouldn't want landscape fabric wrapped around us continually. Those plants don't either. We'd want something that's going to eventually leave us, still give us that same benefits and protection, but eventually leave the soil area around us to be happy. We wouldn't like it if our house was wrapped in black plastic all the time, right? They don't like it if theirs is either. Yes.
People I bought my house from put in this really nice raised bed garden.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a really nice vegetable garden.
Mm-hmm.
Flowers or anything
Yeah.
else. It's on a slope,
Mm-hmm.
but they made the raised bed level.
Mm-hmm.
So on the downhill side, it's 2 railroad ties high,
Mhm.
and then on the upside, it's.
Yeah.
But it looks like they filled it with clay.
It's quite possible they did.
Like the same soil that is in the yard,
Mhm.
it's like all clay.
Mhm.
I don't even know where to start. I can put in, what, compost?
Yeah.
Till it in?
That's
But
if you.
should I use in the inorganic material too, like maybe a vermiculite or something to break it up?
So what I would probably suggest doing is going back to what we look at generally with the resin. It's called Mills Mix. It's a recipe of it. It's a third and a third and a third of topsoil, compost, and then vermiculite or perlite, whichever one you can get, to be able to break in and work in there to allow to mix that up. You can also dig some of that down and then create some lasagna levels, lasagna gardening of it. Dig some of it out, put some cardboard down, some of that organic matter and compost, and layer it up with the soil, putting it back in, layer it up, and pull some of that out to work with it. But that's where I would start with it and try to mix and break those down. All good questions. Huh? Yeah. Or good matic if you just feel like working and breaking it yourself. But yeah, no. And also avoid with clay too. Our first habit is we need to increase filtration, so we want to add sand. Too much sand, too much clay and water creates brick. It's only going to make it harder. So you want to make sure that the sand you're adding in, you're using good quality sand, not like play sand you're going to get that's already tends to be packing. There's a company out of Northeast Tennessee, Mountain Sands. It's a very thin, fine sand. It works really well. You want a very thin, fine, and to use small, minimal quantities of it, because if you add too much, you're just creating a bigger problem. Is also an option to be able to create some filtration in there. But I would, again, mix that in with our compost and other things. Don't just go for straight sand because you were building straight brick in your yard.
Do you think I'd have a drainage problem, though? Because the raised bed still sits on clay.
Mm-hmm. It probably does, but if you can get the levels above it, if you can start working with what's in there, below it will get better over time. If you can start increasing the filtration at the top, it will improve what's below it. It's just it's a process, but it will start to improve it. Because as the organic matter works down, those good earthworms and everything in there, it starts eating and working below the soil, the raised bed line too.
Why did they build clay? I have no idea.
It's what they had.
Maybe they wanted to make pottery.
Maybe. But generally it's what they had and the source they had. They probably had done some type of construction or something on their property and they had it left over and said, let's use it. And say it might be easier to start over if you wanted to. Yeah.
It's in the ideal spot, though.
Yeah.
It's lots of sun. Weeds.
Yeah.
When the previous owners had stopped using it, probably because it's all clay, and they covered it with tarp to keep the weeds down.
My thought would be dig down some if you can, but also go up at least one more level of railroad ties, if not two.
Yeah.
Because right now you're level on the ground, so all they did was make a level planting
Mhm.
spot.
Yes.
So all the weed seeds and everything else
Run straight into it.
Run right into it. So
Mm.
add another, at least one more row of railroad tie. Personally, I would look at doing two.
I like
Would
that
also
idea.
give
Yeah.
you that much more depth, that you can loosen that soil
Yeah.
and then go on and do your
I don't have to
cardboard.
bend over as much, too.
Exactly.
Easier as we mature.
Yes. I always work smarter, not harder. I almost said that backwards. Not yet. None so far. So we're adding nutrients to the soil next. So we're going to go based on our soil test that we got to start with and use what's recommended there. Regular addition of organic matter and using that is going to lessen the need for conventional fertilizer over time, but you're never going to get away from needing to add nutrients back. Organic matter is not the complete solve. Like I said, this is a journey. Once we get it there and level out, we're going to have to continue adding things, or we're going to end up right back where we were when we started if we continue to pull nutrients away and not add it back. With soil testing, we recommend you do a soil test every 3 years. That allows that time for that. It gives a good rotation. We can go to 5 years in some instances. Generally, we recommend every 3 years to be able to get what we continually need to change. Because we've made those changes in 3 years, we don't want to keep using the same thing because we're probably going to need less than what we started out with. And at the end of the day, we're using less. It's going to make, if you've priced fertilizer lately, you're going to know you want to use less because it's very expensive. Correct situations. If we have rocky soil, we're going to work and try to maybe filter, work with that area differently. Or we may just go to a nuclear option and go, hey, let's have a rock garden. We can put rock mulch on top of it, layer it in, do some small plantings, container plantings in those areas. We just dress it up a different way. You can dig those areas out, filter out rocks, work with it, but it's a very time-consuming, labor-intensive way. There's nothing wrong with using other features to be able to create in that space. You can even have, beautiful ornamental gardens in nothing but containers. You can also have great vegetable gardens in nothing but containers. You can get creative with 5-gallon buckets and styrofoam ice coolers if you want to. You can get a lot of things done in that space to be able to utilize it differently. Hard or compacted soil, we're either going to work on trying to create where it's a different type of, that's had a lot of walking go across that area to create that compaction. Whatever is causing that compaction, we're going to try to remove that issue. We're going to add organic matter and reseed in those areas. Or we might come in and decide to do some do some planting in that area, ornamental wise, to keep people from walking through that area like they're doing here. We're going to come in and try to do some cover cropping when we see these spots come up, work that area loose a little bit, rake it up, scratch it up, put a little organic matter and overseed and try to stay ahead of it before it gets this way. Extremely poor soil. We're going to try to make those changes. If we have that really hard clay, we're going to work in adding that soil organic matter and good quality sand to be able to increase and encourage it. Like we said, we want to avoid using too much sand because we're going to create a hard brick pan in our yard. Or we can take a good option of maybe our soil needs more help than what we're physically able and want to put in. So we're going to go with doing some type of raised bed option. Or it's going to take more time than what we're ready for, or even sometimes more expense. Raised beds are usually a pretty large expense to start with, but once you get them there, a maintenance level of them is cheaper over time. So maybe that's what we do to combat these issues, but we figure out a way that works for us to be able to handle our situation the best way possible for us. And it's going to look different than from your neighbor. Whatever works for you is what option needs to work on your property. Within our gardens, this is specific to vegetable gardens, but it can also be an issue within ornamentals as well. We want to rotate our crops. It reduces the disease pressure. It prevents nutrient depletions because, for example, tomatoes pulls out a whole lot of nitrogen each year in that soil. We continue to put it there, we're going to continue to leach out nitrogen, and that area is going to be very deficient and depleting. If we move it each year and put something necessarily that maybe fixates a little better there, we're just going to keep moving it through. Set a rotation. If you don't want to draw out the charts and keep up with it, take a picture of your garden every year and go back and look at that picture and see where things were. It doesn't have to be some big catalog, thick thing that you draw and keep everything up or grid paper it out. It can be as simple as a picture of it to go back and reference to. Maybe you have a great memory. I'm still a young lady. My memory is not always that great because I keep up with a lot of information. I remember where the tomatoes were last year in our yard, but that's about it. So I go back and look at the pictures to reference where it is. And do your planning to move this out. An ornamental landscape, for example, if you've been in an area and you had lots of roses and all of them got some type of disease and issue, the last thing you want to do is come back in with a lot more roses. You want to rotate and do something different that area until that area is clean and safe from those. So it can apply in ornamental issues as well. Minimize our chemical usage. Not saying get rid of it. There's a place for it. There are a lot of good, safe chemicals out there, and I will say every single chemical, if you follow it by the label and the exact recommendations, they're 100% safe. It's how we misuse them, because we like to think that that if we use more, it's better. It's not the case, especially in chemical usage. We can consider some alternatives. Instead of coming in and we're wanting to establish a garden and spraying it down with glyphosate, spraying those weeds down with glyphosate before we start, you can do that. Wait the prescribed amount of time. We can come in though with that cardboard and mulch to start killing off those grass in that area to be able to plant into. There are different options we can do. Choose disease-resistant varieties. We have a lot more technology when we're doing our plants now of being able to do selective breeding to breed in traits that are more disease resistant than some we have in the past. Physical barriers, putting in those issues, putting in those physical things to help restrict those pests from coming in or those weeds from coming in. And then scout and hand pick. Go out there and actually look at your garden. You're starting to see some issues. You can see a lot of issues arise, and you can pluck and move out a lot of large insects pretty easily that can cause issues over time and not have to use a pesticide option. So all of this boils down to several simple steps that you can follow. Work with what you have. Work with it. Work with your site and put back what you take over time. Avoid compaction and disturbances. Do things slowly over time to reduce the compaction and what issues you might potentially create when you're doing it. Plan before you plant. Every good garden starts with a good plan. And it's always good to start small and have a small garden you can manage than a large garden that manages you. Start small, use what you work with, what you can work with. Just because your neighbor has a 5-acre garden doesn't mean you have to. You can have raised beds or buckets on your porch, whatever works for you. Good management, water it, feed accordingly, and then use compost and mulch. Make sure we keep our ground covered. Some other resources you can look into, there's some handouts back there at the back that come from Unlock the Secrets of the Soil within USDA and NRCS. There's some from the UT with the organic and sustainable crop production. And a lot of the materials and snippets we talked about come from a curriculum Tennessee State University has created called the Soil Health Curriculum. It's available on their website. You can go through and look at all of it. Because all of this, we went over in about an hour. We could talk probably 8 hours on each one of these components of this. There's actually an entire curriculum that's set that TSU, it is a 8-session, 2-hour apiece, 2 hours each session on nothing but increasing your soil health. So there's a lot in this topic. We condensed a lot and just grazed to the top of the surface of what we can do for soil. So with that, that's my contact information. Thank you guys very much. If you have any more questions, I'll be glad to help them. What's up?
Can I ask a non-soil question?
Sure.
I'm going to turn this raised bed into a vegetable garden.
Mm-hmm.
Is a fence the best way to keep critters out?
Yes. A sturdy fence. Electrics is great too if you can work with it.
We've had one out there.
There's a lovely groundhog family that lives out here.
The house came with the electric fence.
Mhm.
It's not installed at the moment.
Mhm.
But that's not going to keep the rabbits and skunks and
Yeah.
out.
You still want to do a complete low-lying fence around it. Low-lying, so something that touches the ground. You can bury it a little bit into the ground to keep them from digging under it as easily. It works pretty well. There are some other things. They're supposedly natural deterrents. There's not a lot of research behind it, but we know that they can work. Irish Spring, red pepper sprays, things like that around it causes them discomforts. They won't eat it. Come back and eat. You could also just plant a little row outside your garden so they won't stop and eat there. and hopefully not come and follow. I have some people, that's what they do. They plant it right on the outside of the fencing they choose to use around it, and the critters eat what's on the outside and leave what's on the inside alone. May not work for you, but I see some people that it does work for.
How tall does the fence need to be for the small critters?
We, not the deer. And I said deer 8 feet. Just kidding. But if you don't want them to clear it, no. They'll electrify the top of about a 4-foot fence. And you can also, if you want to speed up the process with deer, bait it with peanut butter. They'll eat the peanut butter off. It shocks them. They'll leave it alone a lot faster. And it's not inhumane. It's just a small shock to deter them. It's no different than if you use it for your dogs or whatever to maintain within your yard. The small critters, rabbits can still jump pretty high. So still that 4 foot would work pretty well. Yeah. Works pretty well with it. You can go a little shorter, but they can still jump. They will also burrow. That's why I say dig it in at least a good 6 inches at the bottom.
All right. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank y'all.
I just handed out a survey. If you would, before you leave, fill that survey out and fold it, and you need to leave it on the table. If you're following us online, be sure to, before you click out online, there's a survey option. Please fill out that survey for us if you're online. Remember that next month, our Lunch and Learn is on Bodacious Day. Very good. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Thank y'all very much. Stop all these live streams showing on.